Now we are going to discuss the venous disorders, and in venous disorders first we are going to discuss deep venous thrombosis or DVT. Okay, so deep venous thrombosis or DVT. There is a virtuous triad which increases the risk of DVT. So what are the components of virtuous triad? See the components of virtuous triad. Virtuous triad increases the risk of DVT. Clear? And the components are endothelial injury, stasis and hypercoagulable state. So the components are endothelial injury, stasis and hypercoagulable state. Clear? Okay. So here you can see this hypercoagulable state is a predominant risk factor for DVT. Hypercoagulable state can be inherited, it can be acquired, inherited like protein C deficiency, protein S deficiency, antithrombin 3 deficiency. There is factor V leading mutation, hyperhomocystinemia. But in surgery, we are bothered about the acquired causes like long duration surgery, obesity, prolonged immobilization, infection. So we are mainly bothered about the acquired causes. Now see in surgery, any surgery which involves the hip joint or pelvis, surgery which is going to involve hip joint or pelvis, in these surgeries patients are going to be immobilized for longer duration, and this is going to increase the risk of DVT. So what are the surgeries which are having high risk of DVT? So surgeries associated with high risk of DVT. Clear? So first is major abdominal or pelvic surgery, orthopedic surgery especially around the hip joint, or urological surgeries in patients who are more than 40 years of age. So what are the surgeries? First, major abdominal or pelvic surgeries. Clear? Major orthopedic surgeries especially around hip joint. So major orthopedic surgeries. And third, very important, urological surgeries especially in patients who are more than 40 years of age. More than 40 years. So these are the surgeries which are having high risk of DVT. Now see, in surgery we are mainly bothered about the DVT prophylaxis. Why? Because the DVT treatment is done in the medicine department. So we are bothered about DVT prophylaxis. What are the components of prophylaxis? You have seen in the ward that after surgery, we encourage the patient and relatives. For early ambulation of the patient. So there is one mechanical prophylaxis, and the patients in whom it's not possible are the patients which are having high risk. In those cases, we go for pharmacological prophylaxis. So see the DVT prophylaxis. It is mechanical and pharmacological. Okay. Now, what is the simplest method? And that's early ambulation. So the simplest method is early ambulation. So you have seen this in the words early ambulation. Clear? And we use pneumatic compression devices or sequential compression devices in the patients who cannot be mobilized, like patients who are having morbid obesity. So second is use of pneumatic compression devices, or we can use sequential compression devices. If you remember, this was the image based question in AIIMS. Yes, and it was asked that it is used for DVT, and what is the name? This is sequential compression devices. Clear? Whenever we are going to inflate these sequential compression devices with air, what happens? It imitates walking and it promotes the blood flow. right? So these are the mechanical methods. In pharmacological methods, we have two agents which are used. One is unfractionated heparin and the second is low molecular weight heparin. You must be knowing that low molecular weight heparin doesn't require any monitoring. That's why it's preferred. So what are the agents we use? One is unfractionated heparin and the second is low molecular weight heparin. Which one is preferred? It's the low molecular weight heparin which is preferred. Why? Because it doesn't require monitoring. So this is DVT prophylaxis. Now imagine if patient is going to develop DVT, first what is the most common site? And the most common site of DVT is calf vein or soleal vein. So see the important questions. First, what's the most common site of DVT? Clear? And it is calf vein or soleal vein. Okay. Now see the second important point. Most common site of DVT leading to pulmonary embolism, and that's thigh vein or femoropopliteal vein. So what's the most common site of DVT leading to pulmonary embolism? And that is thigh vein, also known as femoropopliteal vein. It's the thigh vein or femoropopliteal vein. Now see the clinical features of DVT. What is the most common symptom? Most common symptom of DVT, it is pain and swelling in the calf region. And what is the most common sign? There is calf tenderness. So clinical features, two important points. First, what's the most common symptom of DVT? And the most common symptom is the swelling and pain. There is swelling and pain in calf region. Clear? And what's the most common sign? There is calf tenderness. So most common sign, and it's the calf tenderness. Calf tenderness. Okay. In majority of cases, deep venous thrombosis, it's unilateral or bilateral. So it's unilateral. Bilateral DVT is seen in 30% cases. Clear? So in majority of cases, it is unilateral. Bilateral DVT, this was asked in NEET PG. Bilateral DVT, it is seen in 30% cases. Now see, we discussed that DVT can lead to pulmonary embolism. And in certain patients, this embolism is silent if it is involving terminal branches or small branches. But in certain cases, it can lead to sudden death also. So what? In patients of DVT, there can be pulmonary embolism and it can lead to sudden death. Sudden death. Now see, in which patients there is increased risk of pulmonary embolism? If the vein diameter is small, the thrombus is strongly attached or adhered to the vein wall. And whenever the diameter of vein is large, here the thrombus is loosely attached. So when thrombus is loosely attached in the veins which are larger in diameter, if there is thrombosis, there is high risk. That's why we discussed the most common site of DVT is calf vein or soleal vein. But the most common site of DVT leading to pulmonary embolism, and that is thigh vein or femoropopliteal vein. Second, in patients of pulmonary embolism, what are the other symptoms? So these patients can have pleuritic chest pain, there is hemoptysis, there is dyspnea. So what are the symptoms of pulmonary embolism patients? So pulmonary embolism patients can develop pleuritic chest pain, there can be hemoptysis and dyspnea. Now another important point related to patients of DVT. If patient is having low grade fever, it is typically seen in the patients who are having recurrent pulmonary emboli. So if the patient is having low grade fever, this low grade fever is typically seen in the patients having recurrent pulmonary emboli or embolism. So it is seen in recurrent pulmonary embolism. Right? Now see the signs. We discussed what is the most common sign? Calf tenderness. In these patients, there is edema also. Initially, this edema is pitting, but later it becomes non-pitting. And if you are going to palpate the course of vein in which there is thrombus, there is tenderness along the course of vein. So what are the signs of DVT? The signs of DVT. So we discussed the most common sign. There is calf tenderness. So these patients have calf tenderness. There is edema, and initially this edema is pitting. Initially it is pitting, followed by non-pitting. It's pitting followed by non-pitting. And if we are going to palpate the vein, there is tenderness along the course of vein. There is tenderness along the course of deep vein. Along the course. Clear? So these are the signs of DVT. If you will see one patient and if you are going to palpate the limb of that patient, you will not forget throughout your life. And the second time, if you are going to just palpate the limb, you can diagnose that yes, this patient is having DVT. How? Have a look. Now see what's the problem. In deep venous thrombosis, deep vein is occluded. So what happens? There is impaired venous drainage. And because of this impaired venous drainage, what happens? The limb is having edema, which is initially pitting followed by non-pitting. So there is massive collection of fluid in interstitium, and that's why it is non-pitting. Second, can you see the posture? See the posture of this limb and see the foot. Clear? Whenever we are trying to perform the passive dorsiflexion of foot, there is increased resistance. So much edema is there. So what happens? There is increased resistance to passive dorsiflexion of foot, and this is known as Homan sign. So what are the important signs, named signs which are asked? First is Homan sign. So what is this Homan sign? There is increased resistance, not the pain. There is increased resistance to passive dorsiflexion of foot. So there is increased resistance to passive dorsiflexion of foot. This is Homan sign. Now whenever we are going to apply the pressure over calf region, there is pain, and this is known as Moses sign. Other name is Bancroft sign. So what is the second sign? It is Moses sign, also known as Bancroft sign. Okay, so in this case there is pain on application of pressure. So there is pain on application of pressure over calf. Clear? Pain on application of pressure over calf. And third, whenever we are going to squeeze the calf, there is pain, and this is known as Pratt sign. So third is Pratt sign. It is pain on squeezing of calf. So this is pain on squeezing. Clear? In certain books, these two signs are interchanged. In certain books, it's written that pain on application of pressure is known as Pratt sign. That's wrong. And pain on squeezing is known as Moses. That's wrong. Clear? So Moses sign, whenever we apply the pressure, there is pain. And whenever we are going to squeeze the calf, there is pain. That is Pratt sign. So these are the named signs which are asked. After that, there are two other terms which are asked. One is phlegmasia alba dolens, and the second is phlegmasia caeruleus dolens. Phlegmasia alba dolens, alba white, it means there is painful white leg, and phlegmasia caeruleus dolens, it means there is painful blue leg. So two terms which are asked frequently. First is phlegmasia. This is phlegmasia alba dolens. And the second is phlegmasia. This is phlegmasia caeruleus dolens. Okay. Now the names phlegmasia alba dolens. This is painful white leg. So the other name, it is also known as painful white leg. So the leg will appear white, relatively white. And this is caeruleus. So this is painful blue leg. painful blue leg. Okay, it is very easy to understand. See, imagine that this is the deep vein, this is the deep vein, and this is the superficial vein. Now there is collaterals, there is presence of collaterals which is having connection with deep veins. Whenever the patients are only having deep venous thrombosis, so there is obstruction of deep veins with patent collaterals. So obstruction of deep vein with patent collaterals. So what happens? There is painful white leg. And the second situation in which there is obstruction of deep vein, along with that there is obstruction of collaterals. So whenever both collaterals as well as deep vein is occluded, so what will happen? Both superficial and deep veins are distended with deoxygenated blood, and because of that there is bluish discoloration. There is cyanosis, so bluish discoloration. So that's why there is blue leg. In short, it's wrongly written. Clear? So in phlegmasia alba dolens, there is obstructed deep venous channels, obstructed deep venous channels with patent collaterals, with patent collaterals. Okay, in short, it is interchanged and it's wrongly given. Clear? And in phlegmasia caerulea dolens, there is obstructed deep venous channels and collaterals. So both are obstructed. So both deep venous channels and collaterals are obstructed in phlegmasia caerulea dolens. So these are important signs. Now see how it looks like. So here you can see which limb is relatively white and which limb is relatively blue. You can see both of these limbs are having DVT. Clear? Obstruction of deep venous channels, but here there is patent collaterals, that's why appearance is white. And here can you see there is obstructed collaterals, that's why it is blue. So this is phlegmasia alba dolens, this is phlegmasia alba dolens, and this is phlegmasia caerulea dolens. Okay, so these are the important signs. Now how we are going to make the diagnosis? See, first we have to diagnose that where is the thrombus, which vein is involved, and we have to assess the anatomy. So for this, the investigation of choice for diagnosis is duplex scan. So how we are going to make the diagnosis? Investigation of choice for diagnosis, and that is duplex scan. Frequently asked question. Duplex scan. And in the vein where thrombus is there, what? We are not able to compress the vein at the site of thrombosis. So it's very difficult for you to compress the vein with the probe. So we are going to make the diagnosis by duplex scan. How we are going to manage? Generally, patients of DVT or patients of venous thrombosis are managed in medicine department. What is the basic principle we follow in the management of venous thrombosis? Like deep venous thrombosis, mesenteric venous thrombosis, hepatic venous thrombosis, axillary subclavian vein thrombosis. First, you have to stop the thrombotic process. So what you have to start? Anticoagulants. So see the management. So what we have to start anticoagulants. And here, what is the drug of choice? We start IV heparin. So the drug of choice, it's the IV heparin. So second important point which is asked in exams, that minimum for how many days we are going to give the heparin. So IV heparin is given at least for 5 days. Okay. So we start IV heparin. Simultaneously we have to start the warfarin also. You know, warfarin requires minimum 72 hours or 3 days to act. So we have to start warfarin, and it requires 3 days to work or act. So second question which is asked indirectly, that after how many days dose adjustment is required. So you start warfarin and dose adjustment is required 3rd day onwards. So dose adjustment is required on 3rd day onwards. Now see how we monitor heparin. So for monitoring of heparin we use APTT, and for the monitoring of warfarin we are using INR. Okay. So for monitoring of heparin, so for heparin monitoring, we use APTT. And whenever patient is on heparin, what should be the reference range of APTT? It should be 1.5 to 2.5 when patient is on heparin. And when patient is on warfarin, how we are going to monitor? The patient is monitored with INR, full form of INR, International Normalized Ratio. So we are going to monitor with INR. And on warfarin, what should be the reference range of INR? It should be 2 to 3. So you can see from these two statements how many questions has been asked. Total 4 questions. First, monitoring of heparin is done with APTT. Reference range 1.5 to 2.5. Monitoring of warfarin is done with INR and reference range is 2 to 3. So this is how we manage the patients of DVT. Now we are going to discuss varicose vein. First, what is the definition of varicose vein? Dilated, elongated, tortuous vein with diameter more than equal to 3 mm. So definition: dilated, elongated, tortuous vein, okay, with diameter more than equal to 3 mm. This is the question which is asked in exam. You have to remember. Dilated, elongated, tortuous vein with diameter more than equal to 3 mm. Now see, the varicose vein, it can involve the long saphenous vein or great saphenous vein or short saphenous vein. Now see these two pictures and tell me in which long saphenous vein is involved and in which short saphenous vein is involved. So if you see the first picture here, you can notice that the varicosity is present over which aspect? It is involving thigh. Can you see? It is involving thigh, and it is involving which aspect of lower limb? Anteromedial aspect. So varicosity which is present in the thigh and involving anteromedial aspect of lower limb or leg, that is involving the long saphenous vein. And here you can see in the limb, in the leg, there is involvement of which aspect? This is posterolateral. So in short saphenous vein, this is long saphenous vein involvement and this is short saphenous vein involvement. So here the varicosity is present along the posterolateral aspect of leg. So here it is the posterolateral aspect of leg, and here it is present in thigh and anteromedial aspect. Clear? So this is the presentation. This is how it looks like. Long saphenous vein and short saphenous vein involvement. There is another classification. The varicose vein can be primary or it can be secondary. Primary. In primary, it is because of congenital predisposition with occupational reinforcement. And secondary varicose vein means it is secondary to deep venous obstruction or compression. So see the differences. Varicose vein can be divided into two types: primary and secondary. Primary and secondary. So in primary varicose vein, there is congenital predisposition with occupational reinforcement. What is the meaning? See, congenital predisposition. So there is congenital predisposition with occupational reinforcement. Occupational reinforcement. Okay. Now the problem. Imagine that this is the vein. Okay. And in the vein there are valves. So these are the valves. What do you mean by congenital predisposition? Because of this congenital predisposition, either there are decreased number of valves, so number of valves are lesser, decreased number, or there is defective valves. So congenital predisposition means first either there is decreased number of valves or there is presence of defective valves. Clear? So this is predisposition. And what is the reinforcement? There is occupational reinforcement of prolonged standing. So if patient is having congenital predisposition reinforced by occupation of prolonged standing, like surgeons, teachers, traffic policemen, bus conductors, in those cases what happens? There is increased risk. So here occupational reinforcement means any occupation in which there is prolonged, any occupation in which there is prolonged standing, like surgeons, teachers. Which teachers? PGME teachers, because they take classes for 10 to 12 hours in a day and they have to stand for long duration. Traffic policemen, bus conductors. Now see, secondary varicose vein. So it is secondary to what? Either deep vein obstruction, or deep vein compression. So it's either because of deep vein obstruction or deep vein compression. We just discussed what's the most common cause of deep vein obstruction? Deep venous thrombosis. So here, most common cause of secondary varicose vein, it's the deep venous thrombosis. What are the other causes? It can be because of trauma. It can be because of AV fistula. Okay, and how these deep veins are compressed? See, if a patient is having some mass, some tumor, something in the pelvis, so if patient is having pelvic mass, pelvic tumor, and pregnant patients in whom the uterus is going to tilt on one side and it is going to compress the vein, deep vein of one side. So in pregnancy you have seen that patients are having varicose vein in one limb. Clear? So other causes: compression, deep vein compression because of pelvic tumor, because of pelvic mass, or it is also seen in pregnancy. So compression is also seen in pregnancy. Now what is the presentation? These patients are coming to us and they are telling that, sir, after prolonged standing we develop dull aching pain in the calf region. Mainly there is dull aching pain in the lower limb, especially in the calf region, and they tell you that there is pedal edema also. And then they tell you that, sir, whenever I elevate the limb or take rest for some time, the symptoms disappear. So what are the clinical features of varicose vein? There is dull aching pain. Sometimes there is dull aching pain, sometimes pedal edema after prolonged standing. It is seen after prolonged standing. Clear? And relieved completely after taking rest. So it is relieved completely. After taking rest or limb elevation. Now just understand the pathophysiology of varicose vein, which is very easy to understand. See the normal anatomy. You can see this is the deep vein. Okay, and this is the superficial vein. Right? Deep vein and superficial vein both are connected by perforators. So these are the perforators. Clear? So this is deep vein. These are the perforators. Okay, and you know that in veins there is presence of valves, right? So these are the valves. Can you see the direction of valves? Yes, the direction of blood flow, it's towards heart. So in deep vein there is presence of valves. In perforators also there is presence of valves, and the direction of blood flow should be from superficial to deep. So this is the direction from superficial to deep. And in superficial veins also what happens? There is valves. So direction of blood flow is towards heart. So it's like this. Simple. You know that calf muscle is also acting like a pump or like a heart. So whenever there is contraction in the calf muscle, there is systole, and whenever there is relaxation, there is diastole. So there is systole, there is diastole. During contraction, what happens? Means during systole, the blood is pushed towards heart. And when blood is being pushed towards heart, the valves of perforators, these valves are closed. So blood is pushed towards heart, and during diastole, these valves are closed. Clear? And what happens? There is flow of blood from superficial to deep. So during systole, blood is pushed towards heart. During diastole, blood is coming from superficial to deep. This is normal physiology. Now what is the problem? So you can see, this is the normal thing. When the valve is going to open, blood is going towards heart. It is closed. There is no reflux. But whenever there is damaged valve, what happens? During diastole also, since the valve is not going to close properly, what happens? There is reflux of blood. So varicose vein behaves like a regurgitant lesion. So imagine this valve is abnormal. So what happens? During systole, the blood is going up. But what happens? During diastole, it is coming back. Now imagine if the perforators are incompetent. During systole, there is reflux of blood into superficial system. So ultimately what happens in varicose vein, there is increased end diastolic volume. Means most of the blood remains inside the deep veins and superficial vein. Because it's like regurgitant lesion. So there is increased end diastolic volume, and because of that, superficial veins as well as deep veins both are distended with blood. We cannot see deep veins. So what we can see? We can see only the superficial veins. So these superficial veins are distended with blood. So because of increased collection of blood in both superficial and deep vein, there is chronic ambulatory venous hypertension. So there is chronic ambulatory venous hypertension. And this chronic ambulatory venous hypertension, it is responsible for the complications in the varicose vein. Initially, it was said that there is fibrin cuff theory, WBC migration theory, which is responsible for complication. Those theories are not accepted nowadays. So it is chronic ambulatory venous hypertension which is responsible for the complications of varicose vein. So what are the complications of varicose vein? So see the complications. So these patients have hyperpigmentation. What's the cause? Because of deposition of hemosiderin. So there is hyperpigmentation. There is lipodermatosclerosis. Lipodermatosclerosis. There is eczema. And patients may develop ulceration. Eczema and ulceration. Clear? If the patient is going to develop venous ulcer, also known as varicose ulcer, how we are going to manage the patients who are having varicose ulcer? We are going to manage these patients with or by Bisgard's regime. So what is the name of regime? It is known as Bisgard's. Bisgard's regime is used for management of venous ulceration, varicose ulcers. So what are the components of Bisgard's regime? It is the limb elevation, massage and compression stockings. So the components are limb elevation, massage and compression stockings. So limb elevation, massage and compression stockings. Clear? So these are the components of Bisgard's regime. Now see the various tests which are performed in varicose vein. The tests performed in varicose vein. First is cuff impulse test. And what is the name of this cuff impulse test? This is known as Morrissey's test. So first, what is Morrissey's test? Morrissey's test, it's the cuff impulse test. Second is Schwartz test. Okay. Now see what is this Schwartz test. In varicosity, there is dilatation of vein, and whenever suppose this is the vein which is having the valve, whenever there is stretching or dilatation of vein, what will happen? Obviously, there will be incompetence of valves. So there is stretching. Whenever we are going to tap the vein below, we can feel the impulse at saphenofemoral junction. So tapping vein below, we can feel the impulse at saphenofemoral junction. This is Schwartz test. So what is Schwartz test? It's the tapping varicosity below, tapping varicosity below and feeling impulse at saphenofemoral junction, feeling impulse at saphenofemoral junction. Okay. Now imagine this is a patient, and in this patient what I'm going to do, I'm going to apply the elastic bandage. So in the lower limb, I'm going to apply the elastic bandage. And whenever you are going to apply the elastic bandage in the lower limb, you are going to compress the superficial system or superficial veins. After that, I'm going to ask the patient to do some kind of work or exercise. When patient is doing work or exercise and patient started developing crampy pain. So crampy pain after work or exercise, when you occlude the superficial vein with elastic bandage, this is known as Perthes test. And what does it suggest? It suggests that patient is having deep venous thrombosis. Why? Because you occluded the superficial system and deep venous system is already occluded. So this is Perthes test. There is modification. Rather than applying elastic bandage in the whole lower limb, you can do what? You can just apply a tourniquet at saphenofemoral junction. So apply a tourniquet at saphenofemoral junction, which is going to occlude the drainage from superficial system. And we ask the patient to do some work or exercise. And if patient develops crampy pain after work or exercise, it is suggestive of deep venous thrombosis. So this is modified Perthes. So what is Perthes and modified Perthes? Have a look. Perthes test. Appearance of crampy pain. So there is crampy pain after work or exercise. After work or exercise. When elastic bandage is applied, when elastic bandage is applied in the lower limb. So elastic bandage is applied in the lower limb, it is suggestive of deep venous thrombosis. Clear? And what is modified Perthes test? What is the modification? Rather than application of elastic bandage in the lower limb, what? Tourniquet. Here, tourniquet is applied at saphenofemoral junction. So crampy pain after work or exercise, when tourniquet is applied at saphenofemoral junction, it is suggestive of DVT, and the name of this test is, it is modified Perthes test. Modified Perthes test. Now see this diagram again. Imagine if this perforator is incompetent. So if the perforator is incompetent and we are going to perform the palpation, on palpation, if you're going to perform the palpation, this kind of defect is felt at the site of incompetent perforator. So at the site of incompetent perforator, there is crescentic defect in fascia. And what is the name of this test? This is known as Fagan's test. So what is Fagan's test? Fagan's test. There is crescentic defect in fascia. In fascia on deep palpation. So crescentic defect in fascia on deep palpation at the site of incompetent perforator. So these are the tests which are frequently asked, but one test which is very important and most commonly asked in exam, and that is Brodie-Trendelenburg test. So how we perform this Brodie-Trendelenburg test? There are two components, component 1 and component 2. So we have to ask the patient of varicose vein to lie down. We are supposed to elevate the limb, and after limb elevation we are going to perform the milking. Milking means emptying of vein. When the veins are being emptied, what we are going to do? We are going to apply pressure. Where? At the saphenofemoral junction with the help of thumb. What is the location of saphenofemoral junction? It is located 4 cm below and lateral to pubic tubercle. So we apply the pressure and we ask the patient to stand. When patient is in standing position, we release the pressure, and on releasing pressure we notice that there is rapid filling from above. So if we noticed that there is rapid filling from above, it means which junction is incompetent? It means saphenofemoral junction is incompetent. This is component 1. After this test, again we are going to ask the patient to lie down, and after patient is in lying down position, we are going to perform the milking. Apply the pressure at saphenofemoral junction and we ask the patient to stand. This time we are not going to release the pressure. So you are not going to release the pressure. Now you noticed what? That there is slow filling from below. And if there is slow filling from below, it means blood is going from deep to superficial system, and this is suggestive of what? Incompetent perforators. Okay, so see the components. Brody-Trendelenburg test. Brody-Trendelenburg. Okay, there are two components. First, component 1, and this is component 2. Component 2. In component 1, we have to apply pressure. So apply pressure with thumb at saphenofemoral junction. Ask the patient to stand. Ask the patient to stand. And what happens? There is rapid filling from above. If there is rapid filling from above, it is suggestive of SFJ, saphenofemoral junction incompetence. So it is suggestive of SFJ incompetence. Simple. And component 2, pressure is applied at SFJ. Pressure. In this case, after standing, release the pressure. Release the pressure. And after releasing the pressure, there is rapid filling from above. In component 2, pressure is applied at SFJ. Ask the patient to stand. Clear? And here, we are not going to release the pressure. So SFJ is being occluded, and what you noticed that there is slow filling from below. And if there is slow filling from below, it is suggestive of, this is suggestive of incompetent perforators. So this is suggestive of incompetent perforators. Clear? So these are the two components. By the way, nowadays these tests are subjective. Clear? So what happens? You might miss certain findings. Investigation of choice for diagnosis of varicose vein, and that is duplex scan. In duplex scan, you are going to assess the status of saphenofemoral junction, saphenopopliteal junction. You can see whether there is perforator incompetence or not, and you can rule out DVT also. So what is the investigation of choice for diagnosis of varicose vein? And it is the duplex scan. Duplex scan. So what are the informations you are going to get from duplex scan? First, the status of SFJ, saphenofemoral junction, whether this is competent, whether this is competent or incompetent. First thing. Second, you can assess the status of SPJ, saphenopopliteal junction. See, saphenofemoral junction location is fixed 4 cm below and lateral to pubic tubercle, but saphenopopliteal junction is highly variable. So we have to assess what? Whether it is competent or incompetent. And very important finding, we have to mark the location. So we take the patients, and if SPJ incompetence is there, we get it marked with permanent marker before surgery. So we have to assess the location of saphenopopliteal junction and whether it's competent or incompetent. Third, the status of perforators. Okay. So how many perforators are incompetent and their location? So number and location of incompetent perforators. Incompetent perforators. And very important thing, what? We have to rule out deep venous thrombosis. So we have to see whether patient is having deep venous thrombosis or there is no DVT. Why? Because if there is DVT, it's an absolute contraindication for stripping. Why? Because if deep venous thrombosis is there, superficial system is the only system for the venous drainage. And if you will strip that system also, patient will develop massive lymphedema and severe complications. So very, very important point, that DVT, presence of DVT, it's an absolute contraindication. So this is an absolute contraindication for stripping. Now see the management. There is an advancement in the treatment of varicose vein. Initially, it was said that the treatment of choice for varicose vein is Trendelenburg operation initially, but nowadays what's the gold standard treatment for varicose vein? It's the endothermal ablation. So this is a latest change. So what's the gold standard? In all the books it's updated, gold standard treatment for varicose vein, and the gold standard treatment is the endothermal ablation. Endothermal ablation. And in endothermal ablation, what are the treatment options we have? We have EVLA and we have radio frequency ablation. What is EVLA? EVLA is endovenous laser ablation. RFA is radio frequency ablation. So what is the advantage of endothermal ablation? That this procedure can be performed on the day care basis. In the morning you can admit the patient, in the evening you can discharge. Clear? There is no morbidity, there are lesser risk of complications. So because of this, it is preferred over Trendelenburg operation or stripping. How we do it? Have a look. So in this case you can see that I'm going to insert the laser probe, and after inserting the laser probe, when it is activated, what will happen? The vein is going to be converted into a cord-like structure. So its lumen is going to collapse. So can you see? On activation, what's the problem? Here you can see that the varicosity is going to be converted into a cord-like structure. This is how we use the laser, endovenous laser ablation. So here the probe is inserted inside the vein, and this is how the radio frequency ablation is done. So what we do in this case, we insert the catheter inside the lumen and the electrodes are deployed. So you can see these are the electrodes. Whenever we give the radio frequency energy, so radio frequency energy is initiated, what will happen? You are supposed to withdraw the catheter and the vein lumen start collapsing. So here you can see the vein lumen start collapsing, and finally the vein collapses or it gets narrowed. So this is how we use the radio frequency ablation, and that was endovenous laser ablation. But still questions are asked related to Trendelenburg operation. So see how we do it. So what are the components of Trendelenburg operation? Trendelenburg operation. Now first see what are the important tributaries of great saphenous vein or long saphenous vein. So this is great saphenous vein or long saphenous vein. Important tributaries. This is superficial inferior epigastric vein, and this is superficial external pudendal vein, and this is deep external pudendal vein, and this is superficial circumflex iliac vein. So I'm repeating. First, superficial inferior epigastric vein. Second, superficial external pudendal vein, and there is deep external pudendal vein. And fourth is superficial circumflex iliac vein. We have to ligate all these tributaries individually. So individual ligation of these tributaries. So it can be ligated here. So can you see? Individual ligation of these tributaries. This is the first step. After that you have to do flush ligation. What do you mean by flush ligation? Suppose this is the deep vein. Just at the origin we are going to ligate it. If you are not going to perform the flush ligation, if you leave some stump here, what is the problem? There is dilatation of this stump over a period of time, and this is known as what? Saphena varix. So to avoid this saphena varix, we go for flush ligation. And after flush ligation of long saphenous vein, we have to perform the stripping just below the knee joint. Stripping of long saphenous vein just below the knee joint. So these are the three components. So see the components. Components of Trendelenburg operation. First is individual ligation of tributaries. Ligation of tributaries. So which tributaries we have ligated? So first was superficial inferior epigastric vein. Second was superficial and deep external pudendal vein. External pudendal vein. And third was superficial circumflex iliac vein. superficial circumflex iliac vein. Clear? After that, second step is we have to go for flush ligation of long saphenous vein at saphenofemoral junction. And what's the third step? It's the stripping of long saphenous vein just below knee joint. Okay, now see the important point related to the stripping. If you go beyond the knee joint, what happens? There is increased risk of injury of one nerve. So stripping of long saphenous vein is associated with increased risk of injury of saphenous nerve. And whenever we are stripping the short saphenous vein, there is increased risk of injury of sural nerve. So two important points which are asked in exam. With long saphenous vein stripping, there is increased risk of injury of saphenous nerve, and with short saphenous vein stripping, there is increased risk of injury of sural nerve. Okay, these two questions are asked frequently. So any patient who is having the varicosity of short saphenous vein, in this case the ligation is done at saphenopopliteal junction. So here the ligation is done at saphenopopliteal junction and the stripping of short saphenous vein is done till ankle joint. This stripping is done till ankle joint. Okay, apart from these two methods, what are the other treatment options? See, there is sclerotherapy. Strictly we are using this sclerotherapy for the veins whose diameter is less than 3 mm. Means ideally it is not going to fit in the diameter of varicose vein, because in definition the diameter should be more than equal to 3 mm, and sclerotherapy is used for the veins whose diameter is less than 3 mm. So very important point related to sclerotherapy. So it is used for the veins whose diameter is less than 3 mm. Right? We discussed that what are the other locations where we are going to use the sclerotherapy. If you remember, esophageal varices. For esophageal varices we have two options. One is endoscopic variceal ligation and the second was sclerotherapy. Second was the hemorrhoids, and in hemorrhoids we were having two options. One was banding and second was sclerotherapy, and the third is what? Varicose vein. What's the good thing? That the sclerosing agents are almost same everywhere. So what is the list of sclerosing agents which are used in sclerotherapy? The sclerosing agents which are used, you have to remember the percentage also. First, 5% phenol. 5% phenol in almond oil. Clear? Second is 5% ethanolamine oleate. 5% ethanolamine oleate. Okay, 3% polidocanol and 3% sodium tetradecyl sulfate. So 3% polidocanol and 3% sodium tetradecyl sulfate. If you remember, in hemorrhoids what we were using? We were using 5% phenol in almond oil. Most commonly used agent is this sodium tetradecyl sulfate. So this 3% sodium tetradecyl sulfate, this is the most commonly used method. In relation to sclerotherapy, there is a method which is asked, Tessari method, and this is the most commonly used method for foam sclerotherapy. So in relation to sclerotherapy, the question is asked Tessari method, and this Tessari method, it is the most commonly used method for foam sclerotherapy. foam sclerotherapy. Clear? So this is how we manage the patients of varicose vein. Now see the complications of varicose vein surgery. The most common complication of varicose vein surgery is recurrence, and it can be seen up to 10% cases. So complications of varicose vein surgery. First, most common complication is recurrence, and this recurrence can be seen in up to 10% patients. Clear? So this is most common complication. It is asked in exam. Second, whenever we are performing the stripping, what happens? During stripping, one person is simultaneously applying the bandage in the lower limb. Why? Because there is increased risk of hematoma or ecchymosis, and this is the most common cause of discomfort after surgery. So what's the second problem? There can be hematoma or ecchymosis, and this is the most common cause of discomfort after surgery. And third, there is sensory impairment or sensory nerve injury. We discussed there can be sensory impairment because of sensory nerve injury. So which nerve? We discussed that in stripping of long saphenous vein, there is risk of injury of saphenous nerve, and during stripping of short saphenous vein, there is injury of sural nerve. Now we are going to discuss CEAP classification of lower extremity disease. This CEAP classification was asked in NEET PG also, and it was asked in INI CET also. So what is this CEAP classification? C means clinical manifestations, E means etiological classification, A that's anatomical distribution, and P is pathophysiological dysfunction. One by one, see what is C. So C is clinical manifestations, and these clinical manifestations are graded from grade 0 to 6. So it is graded from grade 0 to 6. This was the question which was asked in NEET PG and INI CET. If it is asymptomatic presentation, we are going to add A. So we write A if it is asymptomatic, and if it is symptomatic presentation, we write S. So A is used for asymptomatic presentation and S is used for symptomatic presentation. Right? Now see E. E is etiological classification. E, that's etiological classification. So in etiology, it is going to be mentioned whether it is congenital, whether it's primary or secondary. So what we are going to mention, whether it is congenital, it's primary or secondary. Clear? So this is mentioned in etiology or E. After that, A is anatomical distribution. So what's A? A is anatomical distribution. So here you can see that which system is involved. Anatomical distribution. So in this distribution, whether there is only involvement of superficial system, there is involvement of deep system perforators. So there is involvement of one single system. So it is involved alone or it is involved in combination. So in anatomical distribution, whether there is involvement of superficial system, deep involvement of perforators. Clear? So it is involved alone, perforators. So it is involved alone or in combination. So it is involved alone or in combination, that is included. And P is pathophysiological dysfunction. So P, this is pathophysiological dysfunction. Pathophysiologic dysfunction. So in this case, what we are going to include? We are going to include whether there is reflux, there is obstruction, and it is involved alone, means one thing is there, or there is combination of both reflux or obstruction. So in this, whether there is reflux or obstruction, there is, it's alone or in combination. So both are there. So this is CEAP classification. One, this classification is asked, and in NEET PG and in INI CET, they ask the grading of clinical manifestations. So see the grading. Now see the clinical manifestations grading. So this is clinical manifestations grading. Okay. First, what is C0? C0 means if there are no visible or palpable sign. So that is C0. So C0 means there is no visible or palpable sign. So here you can see there is no visible or palpable sign, right? Whenever the patients are having telangiectasia or there is presence of reticular veins, this is C1. So in C1, there is presence of telangiectasia or there is presence of reticular veins. So here you can see telangiectasia or reticular veins. So this is C1. This was the question which was asked in NEET PG. They asked about C1. What is included in C1? Clear? And C2 is varicose vein. So whenever there is varicose vein, it is C2. If there is edema, it is included in C3. And what was the question in INI CET? This was the question in INI CET, that if there is presence of what, lipodermatosclerosis, it is included in C4. Okay. So see here, what is included in C2? So C2 means if there is varicose vein, and if patient is having edema, it is included in C3. So this is, you can see the edema, so it is C3. You have to remember two things, C2, C3, C4, because these are the potential questions, easy to remember. C2 is varicose vein, in C3 there is edema, and in C4 complications starts like hyperpigmentation, eczema and lipodermatosclerosis. C4 is further divided into C4A and C4B. What we include in C4A? In C4A, we are going to include pigmentation. So that's hyperpigmentation. And what else? We are going to include eczema. Eczema and hyperpigmentation is included into C4A. And in C4B, this was the question in INI CET, lipodermatosclerosis. With or without white atrophy. So with or without white atrophy, this is included in C4B. And if there is healed ulceration, C5 is if there is healed ulceration, so this is C5. And whenever there is active ulceration, it is C6. So if there is active ulceration, it is C6. So you have to remember this clinical manifestation grading from C0 to C6. Another one-liner question which is asked, and that is SEPS. SEPS. What is the full form of SEPS? The full form is subfacial. This is subfacial endoscopic perforator surgery. So this is subfacial endoscopic perforator surgery. Okay. Now what is done in SEPS? It's written subfacial means below deep fascia. Subfacial means below deep fascia. What is done below deep fascia? Below deep fascia, with the help of endoscope, vascular clip is applied over incompetent perforator. So over incompetent perforator, with the help of endoscope, a clip is applied, and what's the location? Just below deep fascia. So this is SEPS. So this SEPS is performed for incompetent perforator. How it's done? See. So in this picture you can see that this is the location of incompetent perforator. So this is the location of incompetent perforator, and we are going to insert this miniature endoscope. So this miniature endoscope is being inserted beneath the skin, and you can see here in the inset that this is the incompetent perforator, and with the help of this endoscope you can notice that we are going to apply what? The vascular clip. So just below deep fascia, vascular clip is applied over incompetent perforator with the help of endoscope, and this is known as SEPS. Whenever we ligate the perforator below D fascia, in previous case we were using vascular clip. Whenever we are going to ligate the perforator below D fascia, this is known as Cockett and Dodd operation. So see what is Cockett and Dodd's operation. Cockett and Dodd's operation. Okay, so in this case there is subfacial ligation of incompetent perforator. So in this case we perform subfacial ligation of incompetent perforators. Incompetent perforators. Clear? These are one-liner questions. There is another question which is asked related to the names and location of perforators in the lower limb. So see what are the names and what are the locations. Now in this case you can see that this is the medial malleolus, and just below medial malleolus, clear? So below the level of medial malleolus there is inframalleolar perforators, also known as May or Kuster perforators. So here is the location. What is the name? This is inframalleolar, below the level of medial malleolus. So this is inframalleolar, also known as May or Kuster perforators. So these are May or Kuster perforators. Clear? Second, over the medial aspect of calf. So can you see this? These perforators are located over the medial aspect of calf, and these are known as Cockett perforators. Clear? So first is inframalleolar or May or Kuster. Second is Cockett perforators over medial calf. Clear? This is the knee joint. Just below the knee joint there is Boyd's perforator, and above the knee joint is Dodd's. So third is Boyd's perforator below knee, and above knee there is Dodd's perforator. So these Dodd's perforator are present in the distal thigh. So located above knee or distal thigh. Clear? And in adductor canal or in proximal thigh there is presence of perforator known as Hunterian perforator. So it is located in adductor canal or in the proximal thigh. Clear? So how to remember? The mnemonic is in CBD Hunters. So it is in CBD Hunters. In means inframalleolar, also known as May Kuster. C means Cockett, B means Boyd, D means Dodd, and Hunters means Hunterians. So these are the perforators of lower limb which are asked frequently. There is another topic which was asked 2 to 3 times, and it is tip using Trivax system. So tip using Trivax system. Okay, what is the full form of tip? It is trans-illuminated powered phlebectomy. So what is done here? Trans-illumination. So this is trans-illuminated. And how we perform the phlebectomy? So how the vein is sucked and morcellated with the help of powered. So trans-illuminated powered phlebectomy. Powered phlebectomy. Clear? Now see, it is using this Trivax system, and this Trivax system is having 2 components. There is one illuminator and there is vein resector. So what are the component of this Trivax system? It is having vein illuminator. So there is illuminator and there is vein resector. Now see how we use it. Now see, you give incision, and after giving incision, we have to insert the illuminator deep to varicosity. So if you insert illuminator deep to the varicosity, what will happen? The varicosity becomes visible. So can you see? This is the visible varicosity. When you insert the illuminator, and after that, we have to insert the vein resector. So can you see? Via a separate incision, we are going to insert the resector. and this is powered receptor. So whenever we are going to activate it, it is going to suck the vein, and this vein is morcellated. So vein is morcellated and it is sucked. Clear? So what happens here? This illuminator, it is passed deep to varicosity. Okay, and because it is passed deep to varicosity, you can see it becomes visible. So varicosity becomes visible, and after that we are inserting the vein resector. So here, this vein resector, if insert it, so vein is morcellated and sucked. Clear? So now see the name again. What's the name? The name is trans-illuminated. So here we are using illuminator. Powered phlebectomy, so we are going to suck the vein. Vein is morcellated and being sucked, and it is using which? Tyvek system, which is having illuminator and vein resector. So this is tip using Tyvek system. Now see this picture and tell me what is the problem. So here you can see that this is the left common iliac vein, and you can see this left common iliac vein is being compressed by this right common iliac artery. So the left common iliac vein is being compressed by right common iliac artery, and we discussed that if there is compression of a deep vein, what is the problem? There is increased risk of deep venous thrombosis. So because of this compression, there is increased risk of left iliofemoral vein thrombosis. So what is the name of this condition? This is known as iliac vein compression syndrome. So name of this condition, it is known as iliac vein compression syndrome. There are many other names also. Clear? So what are the other names? It is also known as May-Thurner syndrome. May-Thurner syndrome. It is also known as Cocket syndrome or iliocaval syndrome. Also known as Cocket syndrome or iliocaval syndrome. Clear? So what you can see here, there is overriding right common iliac artery, and this right common iliac artery is going to compress the left common iliac vein. So in this case, there is compression of left common iliac vein, okay, by overriding right common iliac artery, by right common iliac artery. Clear? And because of this compression, there is increased risk of iliofemoral thrombosis. So there is increased risk of iliofemoral thrombosis. So this is one line of question which is asked, known as iliac vein syndrome, also known as May-Thurner, Cocket or iliocaval syndrome. Now we are going to discuss venous ulcers. Venous ulcers. And venous ulcers are responsible for 60 to 70% of ulcers in the lower limb. And see, if there is ulcer in the patient of varicose vein, that is known as varicose ulcer. So venous ulcers, these are responsible for 60 to 70% ulcers in the lower limb. And in varicose veins, whenever there is ulcer, this is known as varicose ulcer. We discussed that what is the theory which is leading to varicose ulcer. Initially, two theories were there, fibrin cuff theory and WBC migration theory. Initially, it was said that fibrin cuff theory and WBC migration theory. WBC migration theory. These are responsible for formation of varicose ulcer, but these theories are not accepted nowadays. It is said that it's the chronic ambulatory venous hypertension. It's the chronic ambulatory venous hypertension which is responsible for the ulceration. Okay, so now see how the ulcer looks like, how the lower limb looks like in the varicose vein. So if you see the appearance of lower limb in the varicose vein, it looks like inverted champagne bottle appearance. So in patients of varicose vein, the lower limb, it looks like inverted champagne bottle appearance. Clear? And see how venous or varicose ulcer looks like. See, this is the appearance of varicose ulcer. Now what you can see that there is granulation tissue, pink granulation tissue in the floor. What is the location of this ulcer? If you see, this is the medial malleolus here. So this is the medial malleolus and this is the calf. Okay, so the region between medial malleolus and calf, this region is known as Gator's region. So the region between medial malleolus and the calf is known as Gator's region, and varicose ulcers are usually located in the Gator's region. What is the typical location? Just above medial malleolus. Now what else you can see? You can see in the floor there is pink granulation tissue. You can see that there is sloping edges. So in healing ulcers there is sloping edges. And what else? There is hyperpigmentation of skin around the ulcer. So this is varicose ulcer or venous ulcer. So what is the characteristic of this ulcer? This is venous ulcer. And the characteristic, you can see it is located in the Gator's region. Location, Gator's region. There is pink granulation tissue in the floor. Pink granulation tissue in the floor, and there is hyperpigmentation of skin around the ulcer. Okay, and most important, what kind of edges? In healing ulcers or in varicose ulcer, there is presence of sloping edges. Sloping edges. Okay, how you differentiate it from arterial ulcers, or what are the features of arterial ulcers? See, so here you can see this is arterial ulcer. Can you see it is punched out? And can you see the skin is thin and shiny? And what else you can see? That there is amputation in one of the digit or one of the toe. And what else? Can you see there are brittle nails? So these are suggestive of ischemia, arterial occlusion. So this is arterial ulcer. And what is the appearance of this arterial ulcer? It is punched out. There are signs of ischemia. So what? There is thin, shiny skin. Thin, shiny skin. What else you can find? You can see brittle nails. So there is presence of brittle nails. And what else? You can notice that there is no hair. So what? Loss of hair. And in this case, can you see here? Yes, number of hairs you can see here. So these are the differences between venous ulcers and arterial ulcers. How we manage varicose ulcers or venous ulcers? We discussed we manage it by Viscard's regime. And what are the components of Viscard's regime? Limb elevation, massage and compression stockings. So management, we are using Viscard's regime. And what are the components of Viscard's regime? Limb elevation, massage and compression stockings. Clear? So these are the components of Viscard's regime used for venous ulcers. There are two syndromes which are asked in relation to AV malformations. And what are the syndromes? One is Klippel-Trenaunay syndrome and the second is Casa-Back-Merritt syndrome. One by one we are going to discuss. First we are going to discuss the Klippel-Trenaunay syndrome. This question was asked many times in PGI Chandigarh. Okay. So in both Klippel-Trenaunay syndrome and Casa-Back-Merritt syndrome, there is presence of AV malformations. See what are the other characteristic features. Now see, these patients are having congenital AV fistulas. And because of AV fistula, you know that there is local gigantism or hypertrophy. So you can see in this limb, there is hypertrophy. And because of this AV fistula, there is varicosity. So these patients have varicose vein also. And can you see, there is presence of cutaneous hemangioma. And very, very important point that the patients of Klippel-Trenaunay syndrome, in patients of Klippel-Trenaunay syndrome, there is absence of deep venous system. So see the problems. These patients have congenital AV fistula And because of this AV fistula, what is the problem? These patients have hypertrophy of affected limb. So hypertrophy of affected limb, you can see. Because of this AV fistula, these patients have varicosity. What else you can notice? This is the varicosity. You can notice that there is hemangioma, cutaneous hemangioma. So cutaneous hemangioma, clear. And these patients have absence of deep venous system. Absence of deep venous system. It means there is presence of only superficial system, which is the only channel for venous drainage. So this patient is having varicose vein, and how we are going to manage these varicosities or varicose vein? So this varicosity is managed conservatively by compression stockings. So here we are using elastic compression stockings. Stripping should not be done because these patients have absence of deep venous system. So how we manage the varicosity? It is managed by elastic compression stockings. Clear? So this is managed by elastic compression stockings. These are the manifestations. Sometimes they ask image based question also. So this is Klippel-Trenaunay syndrome. Second is Casa-Back-Merritt syndrome. So here you can see that this patient is having Casa-Back-Merritt syndrome. And what is the problem here? These patients are having hemangioma or congenital AV malformation. And in these AV malformation, there is microangiopathic hemolytic anemia. There is platelet trapping, consumptive coagulopathy. And because of this platelet trapping, there is thrombocytopenia. So this is the typical appearance of Casa-Back-Merritt syndrome. Clear? So this is Casa-Back-Merritt syndrome. So first important point, that these patients are having congenital AV malformation, AV malformations or hemangioma. And in this AV malformation or hemangioma, what happens? There is microangiopathic hemolytic anemia. There is consumptive coagulopathy, platelet trapping leading to thrombocytopenia. So it is associated with microangiopathic hemolytic anemia, there is consumptive coagulopathy, there is platelet trapping, and because of this platelet trapping, these patients have thrombocytopenia. So there is decreased platelet count. So there is thrombocytopenia. Now how we are going to treat it? See, these patients are having AV malformations or hemangioma. So we can go for external compression bandage. So this is the palliative treatment. We can go for external compression bandage, or we can go for embolization of the hemangioma or AV malformation. So what are the treatment options? Either we can go for embolization of AV malformations, or we can go for external compression bandage. External compression bandage. So this is how we manage the patients of Casa-Back-Merritt syndrome. In internship, you have noticed that on daily basis, you have to put 3 to 4 cannulas because patient developed superficial thrombophlebitis. So what is the most common cause of superficial thrombophlebitis? It is the IV infusion. Okay. So we are going to discuss in detail superficial thrombophlebitis. Thrombophlebitis, right? And what are the causes of superficial thrombophlebitis? First of all, most common cause, it's the IV infusion. This is the most common cause. Other causes, it can be seen in trauma patients, Buerger's disease, even certain malignancies are associated with superficial thrombophlebitis. So it is also seen in trauma patients. It is seen in Buerger's disease. What is the triad of Burgess disease? We discussed the mnemonic RIM. R means Raynaud's phenomena. I, intermittent claudication. M, migratory superficial thrombophlebitis. And there are malignancies which can lead to superficial thrombophlebitis. This list is very important because this is asked in exam. What are the malignancies which are going to increase the risk of superficial thrombophlebitis? First, GI malignancies. GI malignancies. Most commonly seen in which malignancies? Carcinoma pancreas. Carcinoma pancreas. It is also seen in carcinoma lung. Okay. It is also seen in prostate, ovarian cancer and lymphoma. So it is also seen in carcinoma, prostate, ovarian cancer. This list is important and it was asked many times. And lymphoma. Okay. First question which is asked most commonly, which malignancy is having or which malignancy is most commonly associated with migratory superficial thrombophlebitis? It is carcinoma pancreas. So most commonly carcinoma pancreas is associated. So how to remember? The mnemonic is GPL pole. It's GPL pole. G means GI malignancies, P means pancreatic malignancies, L means lung cancer, P means prostate, O means ovarian, L means lymphoma. So GI malignancies, pancreatic malignancies, lung cancer, prostate, ovarian, lymphoma. These are the malignancies which are associated with superficial thrombophlebitis. Now see, the patients who are having migratory superficial thrombophlebitis, this is known as Trousseau's syndrome. What is the name? Trousseau's syndrome. There is Trousseau sign and it is carpopedal spasm. Carpopedal spasm seen in patients of hypocalcemia, it is known as Trousseau sign. And there is Troisier sign, that is left supraclavicular lymphadenopathy in malignancies. The lymph node is known as Virchow's node and the sign is known as Troisier sign. Okay, so see three important one-liner questions. First is Trousseau's syndrome. This is migratory superficial thrombophlebitis. Migratory superficial thrombophlebitis. Clear? Second is Trousseau's sign. And this is carpopedal spasm in hypocalcemia. So carpopedal spasm in hypocalcemia. Clear? And third is very important, Troisier sign. So you have to see the spelling also. Troisier sign. And this is left supraclavicular lymphadenopathy. Left supraclavicular lymphadenopathy. The name of this lymph node is known as Virchow's node. So the name is Virchow's node. Clear? These are three one-liner questions. Now see whether there is risk of pulmonary embolism in superficial thrombophlebitis or not. So there is no risk. Why? Because we discussed that if the vein diameter is very small, the thrombus is strongly adhered to the wall. That's why there is no risk. You have seen many patients are superficial thrombophlebitis. So what you have noticed, that there is redness around the thrombophlebitis. So there is erythema, there is pain and there is tenderness. And if you're going to feel the vein, it appears like cord. So it appears like string or cord. So what are the clinical features? The vein is like cord. So it is cord-like on palpation. There is tenderness. So it is tender. And there is erythema of skin around the vein. Erythema of skin around the vein. How we are going to manage? See, in majority of cases it resolves spontaneously. Since there is inflammation, we give NSAIDs. So how we manage? Most patients resolve spontaneously. So this condition resolves spontaneously. For inflammation, we give NSAIDs. So this is how we manage patients of superficial thrombophlebitis. Now see what is this axillary subclavian vein thrombosis. In short, it is also known as ASVT. Okay, and everything is written. What happens in axillary subclavian vein thrombosis? So you can see there is thrombosis of which vein? Thrombosis of subclavian vein, and there is thrombosis of axillary vein. So there is thrombosis of subclavian vein and axillary vein. Clear? Axillary vein or subclavian vein, these are the deep veins. So actually speaking, it's a type of deep vein thrombosis. So we discussed deep vein thrombosis of lower limb, and it is a type of deep venous thrombosis involving upper limb. We discussed that in patients of deep venous thrombosis, there is risk of pulmonary embolism. So here also there is risk of pulmonary embolism. And how much is the risk? It is seen in 1/3 of the cases. So it is characterized by, in this case, what's the problem? It is a type of upper extremity DVT. It is a type of upper extremity deep venous thrombosis in which there is thrombosis of axillary vein and subclavian vein, and there is risk of pulmonary embolism, and it is seen in how many cases? Up to 1/3 of cases. So up to 1/3 of cases it is seen. Now see, it is of two types: primary ASVT and secondary ASVT. Primary means here the cause is not well defined, and secondary ASVT, here it is because of something. So for venous thrombosis, one of the risk factors is hypercoagulable state. So what happens? Hypercoagulable state is going to increase the risk of secondary ASVT, or sometimes patients are having indwelling venous catheter. So because of that also there is increased risk. So see the types. It is of two types: primary ASVT and secondary ASVT. Obviously, which one is more common? So it is the secondary ASVT. This one is primary ASVT is less common, and this one is more common. Okay, now see, what are the names of primary ASVT? It is also known as venous thoracic outlet syndrome, also known as effort thrombosis. Effort thrombosis, why? Because whenever patient is doing some kind of work, mobilization basically at the shoulder joint, clear? So some kind of effort at this shoulder joint, what is the problem? There is thrombosis, and it is also known as Paget-Schroeder syndrome. So what are the names? It is known as venous thoracic outlet syndrome, also known as effort thrombosis, and it is also known as Paget-Schroeder syndrome. Paget-Schroeder syndrome. Now see this picture in relation. You can see this is internal jugular vein and this is subclavian vein. This is the head of clavicle and this is the first rib. Clear? So this is the head of clavicle and this is the first rib. So what is the problem? Because of repetitive motion at this shoulder joint, sometimes there is compression of subclavian vein between head of clavicle and first rib. And whenever this compression is there, there is formation of perivenous scar tissue. So if there is formation of scar tissue, what? The lumen is compressed, narrowed, and what is the problem? There is formation of thrombus inside. Clear? So that's why it is known as effort thrombosis. So what's the problem here? Subclavian vein, because of repetitive motion, subclavian vein is getting compressed between head of clavicle and first rib. Clear? So this is Paget-Schroeder syndrome, also known as venous thoracic outlet syndrome. Now see the problem in secondary ASVT. Here these patients have either hypercoagulable state. So these patients have hypercoagulable state, or in certain patients there is indwelling catheter in the vein, or patients have indwelling catheter. So because of this indwelling catheter in vein, you have seen that we are going to insert long line. So because of that, what happens? There is venous thrombosis, and this is secondary. Now see, the clinical features, diagnosis and management is almost similar to deep venous thrombosis. So clinical feature, if there is axillary subclavian vein thrombosis, obviously what will happen? There is pain and there is swelling or edema in the upper limb. There is collection of deoxygenated blood in the veins. So because of that, there is bluish discoloration or cyanosis. So there is pain, there is edema, there is bluish discoloration. Investigation of choice for diagnosis, duplex scan. And what we have to start if there is thrombosis? Anticoagulants. So see the clinical features. Clinical features. So these patients have pain, these patients have edema, and there is bluish discoloration of upper limb. Bluish discoloration. Clear? How we are going to make the diagnosis? So just like DVT, investigation of choice for diagnosis, and that is duplex scan. It's the duplex scan. Clear? And see how we are going to manage. So initially we have to start anticoagulants. So start anticoagulants to stop the thrombotic process, and after that we go for catheter directed thrombolytic therapy. So we go for, after that we go for catheter directed thrombolytic therapy. Clear? So catheter directed thrombolytic therapy. So this is how we manage the patients of ASVT, and this is all about venous disorders.